Most psychological trauma is defined by the presence of a specific negative event, an outburst of anger, a moment of betrayal, or a visible scar. However, the psychology of growing up without emotional support is defined by an absence. It is the trauma of what did not happen. Psychology refers to this as childhood emotional neglect, a subtle but pervasive deficit of presence where a child's internal world is met with silence instead of mirroring. When a caregiver fails to validate or even notice a child's emotions, that child is forced to develop survival mechanisms to navigate the world in total isolation. Research suggests that these adaptations, while brilliant for a child in an unsupportive home, eventually harden into a specific psychological profile in adulthood. By examining these recurring patterns, we can begin to decode the behaviors that often feel like personality flaws but are actually structural defense systems. Today, we are profiling 12 distinct psychological traits found in those who grew up in an emotional vacuum, focusing on why these patterns occur and how they manifest in daily life. 1. Chronic hyperindependence. Psychology shows that children who cannot rely on their parents for emotional regulation or physical comfort learn a harsh lesson early on, that they are the only ones they can trust. This leads to a structural, "I'll do it myself" mentality, where the individual views the act of asking for help not as a resource, but as a dangerous vulnerability. In adulthood, this manifests as an intense discomfort with delegating tasks or relying on a partner, often resulting in severe burnout because the individual refuses to put their burdens down. Cognitive psychology suggests that, for these individuals, being helped feels like losing control, as they have no historical evidence that others will actually follow through. They often take pride in their self-sufficiency, yet beneath that pride is the exhausting reality that they don't believe anyone would show up for them if they failed. 2. The alexithymia barrier. Growing up without emotional support often means your internal states were never mirrored back to you. When you were sad, no one said, "You look sad," and when you were scared, no one labeled it for you. As a result, many adults who experience neglect suffer from alexithymia, a functional inability to identify or describe their own emotions. Research suggests that if the brain isn't taught to recognize these signals in childhood, the connection between the emotional centers and the verbal centers remains weak. In real life, this feels like a vague numbness or a sense of being blank when someone asks how you feel, often leading you to default to being fine, because you literally do not have the data to say otherwise. This disconnection can lead to physical distress, as the body still experiences the emotion even if the mind cannot name it, resulting in unexplained tension or fatigue. 3. The echo of toxic shame. When a child's needs are ignored, their egocentric nature leads them to a devastating conclusion. They aren't being ignored because the parent is busy or incapable, but because they are fundamentally unworthy of attention. Cognitive psychology calls this toxic shame, a persistent, low-level sense of guilt that exists not because of what you've done, but because of who you are. In adulthood, this manifests as a constant need to apologize for simply existing, or a feeling that you are taking up too much space when you express a basic preference. This shame acts as a silent barrier to intimacy. You fear that if people truly saw your internal world, they would be as uninterested as your caregivers were. It creates a cycle of self-sabotage, where you reject opportunities for connection before someone else can reject you, reinforcing the idea that you don't belong. 4. Rejection-sensitive dysphoria. For someone who grew up in an emotional vacuum, social connection is viewed as a scarce and fragile resource rather than a stable given. Psychology suggests that this history of isolation primes the amygdala to overreact to any sign of disapproval or exclusion. This pattern is known as rejection-sensitive dysphoria, where a perceived slight, like a delayed text or a neutral facial expression, is processed by the brain as a catastrophic threat. The real-life consequence is a state of constant hypervigilance, where you are always scanning for cues that your friends or partner are losing interest in you. Because you lack the emotional floor that supportive upbringing provides, every small social ripple feels like a tidal wave that might sweep you away into permanent isolation. 5. The compulsion to people please. When your own emotions are ignored by caregivers, You learn that the only way to secure safety and connection is to prioritize their emotions instead. Cognitive psychology identifies this as the fawn response, a survival strategy where you obsessively monitor the needs of others to prevent conflict before it starts. You become a social chameleon, shifting your personality, opinions, and even your tone of voice to match whatever makes the person in front of you most comfortable. While this makes you highly perceptive and well-liked, the real-life consequence is a total erosion of your own identity. You don't know who you are when no one is watching. Over time, this leads to profound resentment, as you realize you are loved for your utility, for what you can do for others, rather than for your inherent self. 6. Difficulty setting boundaries. In a healthy environment, a child learns that no is a safe and respected word, but in an unsupportive home, setting a boundary is often viewed as an act of defiance or selfishness. As an adult, this creates boundary diffusion, where you struggle to distinguish where your responsibilities end and another person's begin. Research suggests that those who grew up unsupported feel an intense wave of physiological distress when they try to say no, as if they are severing a lifeline. The real-life consequence is a pattern of overcommitment, where you agree to things that drain your energy and violate your values just to avoid the perceived danger of a conflict. This lack of boundaries eventually leads to a sense of being swallowed by others, further reinforcing the feeling that your life does not truly belong to you. 7. Intellectualization as a defense. When the emotional world is unpredictable or neglectful, the brain often retreats into the safety of pure logic and abstract thought. Cognitive psychology identifies intellectualization as a defense mechanism where you think about your feelings rather than actually feeling them. You can explain the childhood origins of your trauma with clinical precision and zero emotion, using your intelligence to stay safe from raw vulnerability. In daily life, this manifests as a perceived coldness or detachment. People may describe you as being in your head or hard to truly reach during emotional moments. While this makes you excellent at handling crises, it prevents the deep, visceral bonding that occurs when two people are emotionally messy together. 8. The imposter in relationships. Psychology shows that we tend to accept the love we think we deserve, which is based on the internal blueprint created by our early caregivers. If that blueprint is empty, genuine affection from a partner feels suspicious, unnatural, or even like a trick. You might feel like an imposter in your own relationship, waiting for the moment your partner wakes up and realizes you aren't actually worth their time. The real-life consequence is a constant internal pressure to earn their love through extreme helpfulness, achievement, or perfectionism. Because you don't believe you are inherently lovable, you assume the relationship is a transaction that will end the moment you stop being useful. 9. Chronic self-criticism. When a child's emotions are not supported, they do not just feel lonely, they internalize the neglect as a form of self-judgment. The silence of the parent becomes the harsh inner critic of the adult, a voice that constantly devalues your feelings and mocks your needs as dramatic or weak. Cognitive psychology suggests that this self-criticism is actually a misguided defense mechanism. If you criticize yourself first, it won't hurt as much when others do it. In daily life, this results in an inability to celebrate your own wins, as the inner critic is always there to remind you of what you did wrong or how much further you have to go. You become your own worst taskmaster, driven by a fear of failure that is actually a fear of the emotional isolation that failure once caused. 10. Somatization and physical stress. Psychology shows that emotions are not just mental events, they are physiological ones. When we lack the support to process these feelings, they don't disappear, they move into the body. This is often called somatization, where chronic emotional neglect manifests as physical symptoms such as tension headaches, digestive issues, or back pain. Research suggests that the body keeps the score of the missing emotional safety, remaining in a state of high cortisol because it never learned how to come back to a baseline of calm. The real-life consequence is a feeling of mysterious exhaustion that sleep cannot fix, as the nervous system is perpetually on guard for a threat that it can't identify. You may find that you only feel relaxed when you are physically ill, as it is the only time your brain gives you permission to stop performing and receive care. Growing up without emotional support creates a life defined by defensive structures, but these structures are not your permanent identity. Psychology shows that through neuroplasticity, we can build the emotional mirroring and support systems for ourselves that were missing in childhood. The first step is recognizing that your hyperindependence and self-criticism aren't failures, but evidence of how hard you fought to survive an impossible environment. By learning to name your emotions and setting small, safe boundaries, you are slowly filling the vacuum with the presence you always deserved. It takes time to trust that you are lovable for your humanity rather than your utility, but that shift is the key to genuine connection. You are no longer that child in the silence. You have the power to be the support you once needed.